They say the loudest person in the room is usually the weakest. I have found that to be a devastatingly accurate truth. The men who need everyone to know how much money they make, how important they are, and what kind of car they drove to dinner are almost always hiding deep insecurity. Real power does not shout. It does not need a custom Italian suit or a flashy watch. It sits quietly, drinks its black coffee, and lets people reveal exactly who they are. My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am 65 years old and I live in a quiet suburb of Seattle, Washington. I drive a battered 2008 Ford Ranger with a rusted bumper, a moody air conditioner, and a passenger door that groans every time it opens. I wear faded flannel shirts, old Levi's, and worn leather boots. Most mornings I work in my vegetable garden and watch the gray rain roll over Puget Sound. If you saw me at the hardware store buying topsoil, you would not look twice. You would see a retired old man on a fixed income, someone who peaked decades ago and now lives quietly on Social Security. That is exactly what people see, and I would not change it for anything. But I will get to who I really am, and the lesson I had to teach my son-in-law in a moment. First, let me tell you about my daughter, Elena. She is 32, and she is the best thing I have ever done with my life. She is brilliant, warm, and genuinely kind. After her mother died 12 years ago, I raised Elena with one firm belief. Character is the only currency that truly matters. You can lose your job and your house, but the way you treat people when no one is watching stays with you forever. She listened. She became the kind of woman who thanks the janitor, looks people in the eye, and judges people by their actions, not their bank account. 3 years ago, Elena brought home Marcus Vance. Marcus is 35, a mid-level executive at Pinnacle Tech Solutions in downtown Seattle, and the human version of a loud, unearned victory lap. He wears $2,000 suits and a heavy gold Rolex he makes sure everyone notices. His whole personality revolves around his portfolio, his network, and the fact that he recently flew first class. At restaurants, Marcus snaps his fingers at waiters and treats service workers like inconvenient furniture. I noticed it the very first time we had dinner together. I said nothing. I simply filed it away. But what truly fascinated me was how Marcus treated me. From the very beginning, he sized me up. He saw my faded flannel shirt, my rusted Ford Ranger, and my calloused hands, and made a fast, deeply wrong calculation. To Marcus Vance, I was just Elena's mildly embarrassing, poor old father. He spoke to me with that quiet, suffocating condescension arrogant men use when they think they hold all the power. "How's the garden, Arthur?" he would ask in that slow, overly loud voice meant for children. Must be nice to only worry about tomatoes. He constantly offered me financial advice, loud conversations about market strategies and venture capital, while sitting at my worn kitchen table, smiling with pity, convinced I didn't understand a word. In his mind, I was a man who peaked decades ago, someone to tolerate until it was time for a nursing home. There is a certain kind of silence a man learns after decades of studying people. It is not ignorance, it is patience. Every time Marcus mocked my clothes or offered to pay for my coffee because I was on a fixed income, I never corrected him. I never argued. I simply smiled, looked him in the eye and said, "Thank you, Marcus. That's very generous." I didn't get angry. Anger is for men without options. Instead, I watched him. I let him build his arrogance, brick by brick, right in front of me. Now here is the truth Marcus never understood. I do not live on Social Security. I am not a tired old man running out the clock. 35 years ago, in a cold office in downtown Chicago, I founded a private equity firm called Pendleton Holdings. We started small, buying failing assets, rebuilding broken systems, and quietly turning them profitable. Over decades of relentless work, we grew into a multi-billion-dollar empire operating across Chicago, New York, and London. Today, we manage over $6 billion in assets. But you will not find my name in any magazine. I do not attend galas or wear tailored tuxedos. I built my empire to remain invisible, hidden behind layers of holding companies, blind trusts, and executive boards. Publicly, others run it. In reality, I control everything. Quietly, from my backyard in Seattle, wearing my worn-out Levi's. And there is a reason for that. Wealth changes how people behave. When people know you have money, they don't show you who they are. They show you what they think you want to see. Respect becomes performance. So I removed it. I chose to look like a man with nothing because it is the only way to see someone's true character. If you treat a poor old man in a rusty truck with respect, your character is real. If you treat him like he doesn't matter, then I know exactly who you are. And Marcus Vance was showing me exactly who he was, every single day. What made the situation almost poetic was my firm's current objective. For the past 8 months, Pendleton Holdings had been expanding into the tech sector. My board identified a fast-growing but slightly mismanaged software company in the Pacific Northwest, profitable, strong market share, but desperate for capital. It was a perfect target for a hostile buyout. That company was Pinnacle Tech Solutions, the exact place where Marcus Vance worked, the same company where he walked around in expensive suits, snapping at juniors and demanding respect. Marcus believed a powerful, faceless private equity firm was coming to buy his company, clean house, and reward top performers like him. For months, he had been preparing a polished portfolio to impress the mysterious billionaire owner, hoping to secure a vice president role and a life-changing bonus. He would sit at my modest kitchen table eating my food, looking at me with pity, and proudly talk about the multi-billion-dollar deal that would make him a titan of industry. And every time I would sip my black coffee, nod, and say, "That sounds very complicated, Marcus. I hope it works out for you." He had no idea that the billionaire buying his company, the man holding his career and ego in his hands, was the same old man he mocked at dinner. The turning point came on a crisp Thursday evening in October. Elena called, her voice overly cheerful in that way people use when they are hiding something. Marcus was taking us out to celebrate. He had booked a table at an exclusive steakhouse in Bellevue. Dim lighting, no prices on the menu, and waiters dressed better than most people at weddings. According to Marcus, the buyout was nearly complete, and he had been assured a promotion to vice president. He wanted to celebrate his guaranteed success. I told Elena I would be happy to come. I arrived in my old Ford Ranger. The valet looked at the rusted bumper, then at me, clearly unsure. I handed him the keys, gave him a tip, and walked inside wearing my best outfit: clean Levi's, a faded blazer, and a neatly pressed shirt. The hostess led me to a private booth where Marcus and Elena were already seated. Marcus looked completely at home, his expensive navy suit sharp under the dim lights, his gold Rolex placed where everyone could see it. "Arthur, glad you could make it," he said, not standing, just giving a casual wave. "I already ordered appetizers. You've probably never tried Wagyu beef. That's fine, Marcus." "Thank you," I replied, taking my seat. I glanced at Elena. She smiled, but her eyes looked exhausted, the kind of tired that comes from constantly managing someone else's ego. For the next 90 minutes, I barely spoke. I didn't need to. Marcus Vance was doing all the talking. He dominated the table with the absolute confidence of a man who has never once been told he was talking too much. He spoke loudly about his aggressive market strategies, his brilliant portfolio, and how the faceless East Coast billionaires buying his company were going to realize instantly that he was the only thing holding his department together. I listened. I nodded. I ate my steak. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that my private equity firm, Pendleton Holdings, actually owned the commercial real estate building this very restaurant was located in. I knew the exact profit margin on the Wagyu beef he was bragging about. But the moment that sealed his fate happened when the waiter returned to clear our plates. The waiter was a professional, older gentleman standing quietly beside our table. Marcus leaned back, adjusted his cuffs, and looked across the table at me. He looked at my faded corduroy blazer. He let out a short, condescending laugh. "You know, Arthur, once this promotion comes through and my new bonus hits, we really need to take you shopping. Get you out of those cheap clothes. That jacket looks like it survived the Great Depression." Elena stiffened. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice tight. "Don't." "What?" "I'm just saying." Marcus raised his hands defensively, looking at the waiter as if seeking an ally. "The guy needs an upgrade. Can't have my father-in-law walking around looking like he's about to ask for spare change." The waiter immediately averted his eyes, deeply uncomfortable. The table went completely, suffocatingly silent. There is a specific kind of quiet that falls over a man when he stops observing and starts preparing. Every instinct in a normal man's body would have screamed to flip the table, to raise his voice, to tell this arrogant, flashy child exactly who was sitting across from him. But I am not a normal man, and I do not lose my temper. Anger is a cheap emotion. I prefer consequence. Then, the waiter brought the leather folder containing the check. He placed it carefully in the center of the table. I moved my calloused hand toward it, not to pay, but simply to see what Marcus would do. Marcus aggressively snatched the leather folder away from my fingers. He pulled out a heavy metal credit card and slapped it down with a loud, deliberate thud that echoed in the quiet restaurant. "I've got this, Arthur," Marcus said, his voice loud enough for the tables next to us to hear. He looked me dead in the eye, a pitying smirk on his face. "Put your little wallet away. I know you're on a fixed income, and a stake in a place like this probably cost your entire monthly Social Security check. Consider it charity." Elena closed her eyes. I could see the profound embarrassment and pain washing over her face. She was bracing for an explosion. I looked at Marcus Vance. I looked at his $2,000 suit, his gold watch, and his unearned, fragile pride. I didn't yell. I didn't glare. I simply folded my hands on the table, smiled the warmest, calmest smile I possessed, and said, "Thank you, Marcus. That is very generous of you. I appreciate your charity." He smirked, completely satisfied, believing he had put the poor old man exactly in his place. He had absolutely no idea. Right there in that booth in the building my company owned, I made a decision. This was no longer just an observation. It was a verdict. By the time I walked out of that restaurant and got back into my rusted Ford Ranger, Marcus Vance's comfortable, arrogant life was already over. He just didn't know it yet. I drove home that night in my rusted Ford Ranger, the engine groaning against the cold Seattle air. Elena and Marcus took a separate car back to their place. I walked into my house, hung my faded corduroy blazer on the hook by the door, and made myself a cup of black coffee. It was 1:45 a.m. There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over a house at 2 a.m. Not a peaceful quiet, but the kind that has weight to it, the kind that presses down and makes every small sound, like the hum of the refrigerator, feel louder than it should. That is the quiet I sat in. I did not go to sleep. I sat at my modest wooden kitchen table, the one Marcus thought was a symbol of my financial failure, and I opened my laptop. I didn't need to yell at the restaurant because I had a much more effective tool at my disposal. Absolute, unchecked corporate authority. I am an extremely patient man, and patience, it turns out, is the only currency that matters in a long game. At exactly 2 a.m. I made a phone call. I dialed a number that goes directly to the personal cell phone of a man named David. David is the lead forensic corporate auditor for Pendleton Holdings. He is the kind of man who spends his professional life figuring out how people construct lies that look like truth. He does not ask questions. He just finds the bleeding. He answered on the second ring. "Arthur," he said, his voice completely awake. "David," I replied, my voice steady, sipping my black coffee. "I need a favor. We are in the final stages of the Pinnacle Tech Solutions acquisition. I want you to pause the macro review. I need a micro-level, deep-dive forensic audit specifically into the department managed by a mid-level executive named Marcus Vance. I want to see everything. Every expense report, every project timeline, every client dinner, every internal email he has sent for the last 3 years. I want to know what he eats for breakfast on the company dime." There was a brief pause on the line. "How deep, Arthur?" "Down to the studs," I said. "Bring it to me personally when you are done." The audit took a few days to fully document. During that time, I continued my life exactly as before. I tended to my tomatoes. I wore my flannel shirts. I even saw Marcus once when he dropped off Elena. He gave me that same pitying, arrogant smirk. I smiled back. On the 4th morning, David arrived at my house carrying a thick, unmarked manila folder. When the final report landed on my table, I sat with it for a long time. Not because I was surprised. I was not surprised. I sat with it because I wanted to be sure, completely and absolutely sure, before I did what came next. It was worse than I thought. Marcus wasn't just an arrogant man. He was an incompetent fraud. The audit revealed a staggering level of professional smoke and mirrors. His highly praised aggressive market strategies were actually the intellectual property of 2 junior analysts working under him, whom he had repeatedly blocked from promotions while taking full credit for their work. His department wasn't actually turning a profit. He had been creatively shifting losses to other quarters to make his quarterly reviews look spotless. But the most damning part was the expense reports. The $2,000 custom suits, expensed as client presentation attire. the luxury dinners he bragged about, billed as prospective investor meetings with people who didn't even exist. Every single meeting, every document, every client dinner billed on company time, all of it documented, all of it sitting in a folder on my desk. He was bleeding the company dry to fund his own ego. I closed the folder, smoothed my hand over the cover, and looked up at David. "Thank you, David," I said. "Prepare the acquisition board. We finalize the Pinnacle buyout next Thursday." The trap was fully constructed. All Marcus had to do now was walk through the door. The weekend before the acquisition was finalized, Marcus and Elena came over to my house for a Sunday afternoon lunch. It was a beautiful, crisp Seattle afternoon. I had spent the morning in my garden, my hands in the dirt, wearing the exact same faded flannel shirt Marcus found so deeply offensive. When they arrived, Marcus was practically vibrating with unearned confidence. He walked into my modest living room, looked at my old furniture with his usual disguised distaste, and immediately started talking about himself. He couldn't help it. For men like Marcus, silence is a threat. They have to fill it with the sound of their own importance. "Big week ahead, Arthur," he said, leaning against my kitchen counter while I poured him a glass of iced tea. "The private equity buyout is closing this Thursday. I've been polishing my presentation for the new billionaire owner all weekend. They're flying in from the East Coast, completely clearing out the dead weight on the executive floor. My promotion to VP is basically a done deal." I handed him his glass. "Is that so?" I asked, my voice completely flat, completely calm. "Oh, absolutely," he smirked, taking a sip. "When you operate at my level, you don't wait for opportunities. You position yourself for them. I'm going to walk into that boardroom, shake the new owner's hand, and show him exactly who holds that department together. It's going to be a bloodbath for the guys under me, but hey, that's corporate Darwinism." He was bragging to me about the presentation he was going to give to me. He was standing in my kitchen, drinking my tea, happily describing how he was going to impress the very man he was currently mocking. I looked at Elena. She was staring at her hands, looking tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying the weight of a man who only cares about himself. I needed to make sure she was protected from the blast radius of what I was about to do. Early Monday morning, I made a second phone call to my legal team. I instructed them to set up an irrevocable blind trust for Elena, entirely separate from Marcus's reach, ensuring that no matter what happened to his career or his finances, my daughter would never spend a single second of her life worrying about money. With Elena completely secured, the board was set. I didn't need to do anything else but wait. I looked back at Marcus in my kitchen. I smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "Well, Marcus," I said, "I wish you the absolute best of luck on Thursday. I have a very strong feeling that the new owner is going to see exactly who you are." "I appreciate that, Arthur," he said, missing the point entirely. Thursday was coming, and so was I. Thursday morning arrived quietly, the way days that change everything usually do. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., drank my black coffee, and walked right past the faded flannel shirts and Levi's in my closet. I reached all the way to the back and pulled out a custom-tailored $6,000 charcoal suit I had made in London. I tied a silk tie, slipped on polished leather Oxfords, and walked out my front door. I did not take the rusted Ford Ranger. A sleek, black private town car was waiting in my driveway. I arrived at the glass-walled corporate headquarters of Pinnacle Tech Solutions at 8:15 a.m. I took the private executive elevator to the top floor. I walked into the main boardroom, a massive room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Seattle. My legal team was already there. My board of directors was there. David, my lead corporate auditor, was sitting quietly to my right. I walked to the head of the heavy mahogany table, buttoned my jacket, and sat down. At exactly 9 a.m., the glass door opened. Marcus Vance walked in. He was wearing his best $2,000 Navy suit, his heavy gold Rolex flashing under the recessed lighting. He was carrying a stack of glossy presentation folders, his chest puffed out with that exact same unearned, arrogant confidence he brought to my dinner table. He scanned the room, offering a practiced, winning smile to the board members, the lawyers, and then, finally, his eyes landed on the head of the table. I watched it happen in real time. I watched the profound understanding move across his face in slow motion. He looked at me, the poor old man who puttered in the garden. He looked at my suit. He looked at the powerful men and women in the room who were entirely deferred to my presence. The arrogant smirk dissolved completely. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking pale, terrified, and suddenly very, very small. The room was suffocatingly quiet. I let the silence stretch for 10 full seconds. I let every single one of those seconds land heavily on his shoulders. "Good morning, Marcus," I said. My voice was perfectly calm, perfectly flat. He opened his mouth, but absolutely nothing came out. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was waiting for the ground. I didn't yell. Anger is for men who are out of options. I simply picked up the thick manila folder David had given me and tossed it onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy, final thud. "You prepared a presentation for the new owner of this company," I said, leaning forward slightly. "But I prepared one for you. Inside that folder is a complete forensic audit of your department. It details the strategies you stole from your junior analysts. It highlights the thousands of dollars in luxury dinners you expensed as fake client meetings to feed your own ego. It proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that you are a complete professional fraud." Marcus started shaking. "Arthur, I can explain. Can." "Mr. Pendleton," I corrected him smoothly. "I am the founder and majority shareholder of Pendleton Holdings. I own this building. I own this company. And as of this exact second, I own your resignation. You are fired, Marcus. Leave your keycard on the table and walk out of my building." I didn't stay to watch Marcus pack his desk. That is a task for building security, not for me. I took my private car back to my quiet house in the suburbs, hung up my $6,000 charcoal suit in the back of the closet, and waited. Later that evening, Elena came over. We sat at the exact same worn wooden kitchen table where Marcus used to confidently mock my clothes. I poured her a cup of hot tea, and for the very first time in my life, I told my daughter everything. I explained Pendleton Holdings. I explained the multi-billion-dollar portfolio. I explained the deliberate, calculated silence I had maintained for decades. And finally, I told her about the irrevocable blind trust I had legally established in her name just days prior, ensuring she would never, ever suffer from her husband's catastrophic professional and financial downfall. Elena didn't scream. She didn't panic. She just looked at me, finally understanding the absolute depth of my protection. And she wept. She cried not for the end of her marriage to a complete fraud, but out of profound relief and love. Marcus Vance lost everything that Thursday. He lost his prestigious job, his fake wealth, his unearned pride, and eventually, his marriage. I heard through the corporate grapevine that he moved out of Seattle shortly after, entirely broken and stripped of his fragile ego. As for me, the very next morning I woke up at 5:30 a.m. I drank my black coffee, put my favorite faded flannel shirt back on, laced up my scuffed leather boots, got into my rusted 2008 Ford Ranger, and drove to the local hardware store. I had tomatoes to tend to, and I don't like to be late. They say you can always judge a man's true character by exactly how he treats someone who can do absolutely nothing for him. Marcus failed that test, and he paid for it with the life he thought he had secured. If you enjoyed this real, raw story, please hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more family-centered stories like this. Thank you for listening, and I will see you on the next one.